Station, because if you sit over in this chair here, it'll make it a lot easier.
And I'm just getting over it. My voice is not very
Okay. But it's important for us to approach what happened to your son. You can start any way you want. Like you can start with his name, his nickname, and school.
He was born in Madison here on June 25th, 1949. And his father was just graduating from mining engineering school. So within a month we moved up to northern Minnesota. So he lived in small towns, northern Minnesota, Hibbing, Virginia. And then we were transferred to upper Michigan, to the Marquette Range. And we lived there a couple of years, and then his father wanted to get a law degree, so we came back. So Terry had lived in these smaller places in the North Country, and he knew the woods. He knew all just. He was born a little bit too late. I guess he would have been a good frontierman. So then we came back, and his dad got a law degree, and we lived in my father's farm. So he knew about rural life then. And after the farm, we moved to Cleveland, and so he knew city life, and he never made any very close contacts for any length of time, because we would live probably not more than 3 or 4 years in one spot and go on. So then, and after Ohio, his father wanted to have private practice, so we moved to a small town in southern Wisconsin, Bloomington, Wisconsin. And Terry graduated from high school there. I think it was in 67 he graduated. And then he came to university. And by that time, our law practice wasn't any big deal. So I had come back here to work. And Terry came here and went to university. He lived here in the house with my father and myself there. But he came from a military family. His grandfather, as Major General Smith, he commanded the 32nd Division and had served in the South Pacific with the 32nd Division during World War II, and later commanded it at Fort Lewis, Washington, when, it was called the Berlin Wall crisis, a Cuban missile, but they alerted the 32nd Division. So my son
was
had...
aware of this?
As a little boy, I mean, he had a little fatigue outfits. The military was in his mind. He had nothing, he couldn't think of it doing anything but to enlist or do something like that. And one of his grandfathers, great-grandfather, I guess, had fought in the Civil War at Shiloh and lost a leg. So he would never think of doubting that whether the war was a right war, or he didn't think anything about that. So, but he was in the ROTC here at the university. But adjusting to campus life here compared to what he'd been used to in the small town high school, I don't think he applied himself as well as he could. He got grades too easy. I mean, it was easy for him in high school without doing a lot of really studying. He preferred to hunt, to hunt weekends and stuff like that. So he was probably not the greatest student here. And he was still thinking about that, when am I going to have to go to war? So finally, he was on probation, and he went up and worked at the Badger Powder Plant up in Baraboo. And then, he enlisted.
What year was this?
Well, he would have enlisted when he was 19, I believe.
So it was 2 years after high school.
And he had a year and a half in college. So he enlisted in 69. Would have made him 20. And he had trained, his first, his boot camp was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And then he went on to advanced infantry down in Fort Polk, Louisiana. And from there he went into Fort Benning, Georgia, and he was a sergeant. After he got his stripes, he was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, where he was dealing with National Guard outfits, training troops there. So he had several months training with the National Guard. He was training them as a sergeant. And he went over to Nam in 1970. He was 21 then.
What unit was he with? Was he a Marine or?
Army? No, he's Army.
He was in the Army.
Yeah. And I don't think he had been in Vietnam. It was first patrol that he went out on. He was on a patrol. There was only about 3 of them came back from it. The radio operator was shot. They were snipers picking him off.
When he first went over, he went with the Marical Division. And
he was whatever that, I don't understand, and you probably know what that address, what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he was on patrols, and that was a very bad experience for a young boy that had never seen anything. I don't think he'd ever been to a funeral in his life to see what had happened. He became friends with a young man. His name was Wayne Coble. He was from a military background. His father was a career man, Army man. And he and my son seemed to have a lot in common. I guess he liked music that Terry played. He played guitar. And anyway, they were stationed on, what is it? Leary was on the Marianne. He was taken out of the patrols and given an order. He had a ranking for a sergeant, and he really belonged having a crew like that. So he called it the 3-gun, and he had a mortar squad. And that left his friend still out on patrol. And one of them would go on point, the other one watch out for him. Well, anyway, Terry got his R&R to Australia, and he met with Wayne Coble just before he was leaving for Australia. And they had an all-night visit and talking, playing guitar. And when he got back, he found out that Wayne Coble had been killed. He'd been shot by a sniper and killed. And that really blew his mind about that time, to think that he'd lost Wayne. He writes a poem. It was a poem in that box of letters. How devastated he felt about lost Wayne, because he became close friends with Wayne. And then the Marianne Fire Base was under fire, and they had moved out. He and several artillery pieces and a couple of mortars had moved out at chow time to the fire base duty when the Marianne came under attack. And he called in for air support, but they couldn't save it, and it was wiped out. And the next day, he had to go back and pick up his friends. And he told me this. It's not in any of his letters, not in any letters he wrote to me anyway, about what it was like to have to identify somebody because of a ring they wore. So then he was taken out of he was sent to Da Nang, and where he shipped home from there. And he came back and he told me in some of his letters, he said that he didn't think that he'd be able to get right back into school yet. He hadn't really lived. He hadn't done anything at all. He hadn't made any big plans. So he wanted to travel for a little bit. He wanted to probably go check up on some of his friends that he met in Vietnam. I think that was primarily what he intended to do. And so he didn't want to, he wanted to tell me, he said, don't try to push me into doing something like going back to school, getting a job 9 to 5. He wasn't ready for that. Well, I wouldn't have done that anyway. I would never have interfered in what he wanted to do. So, but he did start back in school. But the university was still in a turmoil here. And at that time, some of the students would spit on you if you were in uniform. And he couldn't quite take the attitude of the protesters. Although I do believe that his opinion was that he wouldn't have, he went, but I don't think that he would have wanted to go, and had he had to do it over again, I really don't think that I think he was terribly disappointed in what he saw in Vietnam. He didn't think, I guess he thought he was going to go to save a country or do something for them, and I guess he found out that they really didn't care if he was.
In other words, we were supporting the Vietnamese, and we were supposed to give them our technical knowledge and our military advice and to help them win the war. And he found that it was not so much our winning the war as just participating in it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was disappointed that we weren't winning.
Well, they said you could go out and look for Charlie, but not to fire first. You had to wait till you were fired. Well, he couldn't understand fighting a war like that. I mean, for all the books he read, that wasn't the way you win a war, and of course we didn't win a war. So the whole thing had turned around in his mind. He was, of course, considerably older than he was when he enlisted. Well, he started going back to school, but again, as I said, his mind wasn't really on it. And so he got married.
Did he talk about his experiences to you?
Well, he and I had good rapport. We talked a lot about it. But when some of the bloody things that he wrote about, he never wrote them in my letters. But he wrote them to his dad. And his dad and I, although we were divorced, we had maintained a friendship. And we would exchange the letters. And he not really understanding. Maybe Cherry didn't want me to know some of the things that had happened to him. He told about one time they'd been out on a patrol and a Vietnamese was shot up, and he knew he was badly wounded. And Terry said, well, he said, I'll go find him, because he felt that he was, he'd got away and he could track him. Well, his higher officers thought, well, he must have gone up this way up a hill, and Terry said, a wounded person isn't going to go up a hill, they're going to go down a hill and go towards water to a stream or something and follow that. Well, anyway, he found the Vietnamese, and he carried him back, and his arm was mangled, and he was shot up pretty bad, and he must have had a diarrhea or something that the officers took, and I found out later that he did die of his wounds. He was so badly shot up. Well, he was just disillusioned with an awful lot, and as you mentioned before about that type of outfit he was in.
Did he talk about the outfit?
Well, in one of his letters, he said he came upon them and they found out they couldn't read an overlay, a map. They didn't know where they were. He said, and here I am. I'm a sergeant, and I got to tell the lieutenant and some of these officers how to read this map.
Exactly.
He said, it doesn't give you an awful lot of confidence.
That's your leadership.
Yeah, and he said you just couldn't really have much confidence in what you're out there for.
Yes.
When he had read the map for him. Well, anyway, he was married, and he still wasn't able to find the right kind of job. I had friends that say, well, I'll get him on the street department. He can go and paint stripes. And he didn't care. He'd have done anything. But he didn't get on there. So he went with a crew stringing cable television. He worked on this crew that strung cable all through the area out here. Well, they're sort of a migrant type crew, they'll do a job here and then they'll move on and they go someplace else. Well, at this time he was married, and he knew he couldn't go on. Well, the job had petered out, and he knew he was without work. And he felt, I know his attitude was that he wanted his marriage to work. He wanted to be the support of he didn't want the wife. And Donna was working at the Weizmann Center. She did research for cancer. And so it wasn't that they needed the money. I mean, that they were in desperate straits or anything like that, but he wanted to be earning the money, not having Donna bringing the money home. And it was the last day that he had worked. We stopped down at Bee's Tavern. he was drinking beer, I guess, talking to some older people, and then one of the representatives from the cable company happened to be in there that night. He was talking with him, and he kept calling for Donna to come down. And, come on, Donna, take your bicycle. They lived right over in the Arboretum.
Mm-hmm.
Ride your bicycle down here. Bees is on Park Street. And come on, Donna. And she didn't. She was, I suppose she was annoyed because he didn't come home that night, but he was upset because he didn't have a job anymore. And his crew was going to go on, and he couldn't go on. And she didn't come. Well, he went, he left the place, and he stopped over at the treehouse. There was, he was the assistant manager at the store where I worked. It was his bachelor party. And he ran into him, and he talked to him, and he wasn't drunk, but he wasn't sober either, I don't imagine. But he was very moody at that point, and very down, because Jack Downing saw him and said he said, I visited with him, but he said, I have my group here in this bachelor party. And he was the last person that I know that saw him, and he went home, and there must have been a quarrel between he and Donna. There were some words. She was probably angry with him. It must have been about 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11. So he'd been out about 5 hours or maybe something. There was some quarrel, and I don't know. There were 2 bedrooms in the house. She was off in the other bedroom apparently. And he got undressed, and he brought back a 45 that had been one of his buddies. From service. His buddy had, I don't know, they'd need some sort of agreement that if he got it first, Terry was to get 45 and something. And so he had that 45 that he brought back. And I really don't believe it was intentional, because if you put a 45,
yes,
it's a glancing blow.
exactly.
And because, she heard the shot, and she heard glass break, and it had gone through the wall and broken some cups that were hanging in the kitchen. And the emergency squad came and got him. He was I almost think that he was playing a part or something. He was going to show somebody. I don't know. He would have been quite an actor had he ever gone into that field. So that was the end of that, and he was just short of being 25. This was May 3rd, 1974, and he would have been 25 on June 25th. And of course, it was a big shock, and it affected me a great deal because I was very close to him. We could talk at night. He'd take me to movies. He'd call me up at work, and say, "Come on, Mom, let's go and see a flick." And so we'd go to a movie, pick up a hamburger, and we'd sit and talk.
What about his wife today? Is she still in Madison?
Well, that's a tragedy. After Jerry died, she was devastated. And her family were living at that time in Florida. They had moved there, and they were living in Florida, so they came and got Donna and took her down to Florida. And she finally got some work in the cancer area again. And the doctor that she was working with was cancer. He had 2 offers, one of which was Minnesota, which he accepted at Rochester. And he moved her along with his own family when he asked her to go with him to Minnesota. So she was up there working. And it'll be 2 years in December 19th, something like that. She was struck, her car was struck. She drove a Toyota, and she was in a coma. She had a fractured hip and a dislocated shoulder, and she was vegetable. And she just died about a month. She lived in a coma for 18 months in a coma, and her mother had to diaper her, feed her through a tube in her throat. She never uttered a word. I guess they had her in a wheelchair or something, but if you talked to her, you wondered if you were getting through to her or not. People tried to, Terry's grandmother, that lived in Oshkosh, she'd call and try to talk to her, thinking she'd hear a familiar voice. Maybe she'd snap out of this coma. And they were taking her in a van that was set up to carry her up to a hospital in Massachusetts. Now, why that far away from Florida? I don't know why they were taking her that far away.
Could be a specialized hospital.
Some special hospital. And anyway, she died just short of the hospital, 3 blocks from another hospital, but about 30 miles short of the hospital where they were taking her for some surgery. It could have been the heat, it could have been a heart attack. I really don't know. I wrote a letter to her mother in which I enclosed a check because it had a lot of, there were a lot of circumstances. But I haven't heard from her. I think every day I'll get it. I sent it about 3 weeks ago. I'm hoping that I would hear from her. It's all I know is what I hear through my mother-in-law. She called me and told me that Donna died. So that was that. And while she was in Minnesota, she got a flood came up. Now where her home was located, I don't know. But after Terry died, she bought a small 1-bedroom house, which is ideal for doctors or nurses that just want to have a small place. You don't want to live in an apartment. And she had 2 dogs. And it had a fenced-in yard, so she could keep these. One was an Irish setter, and the other one was a spaniel. And a flood came up, and it washed out. She said her furniture was floating right out in the yard. Where it was located, I don't know. And she put a leash on the dogs, and she got them to her car. Her car started, and it wasn't down in the area where her house apparently was being washed away. And she went to a Red Cross station and worked. She locked her dogs in the car, and she worked helping the people that were hurt and injured. And later she lost everything. Then she had, it was so damaged that she sold that house. Whatever they could do with it, it was a foundation, I guess you could just see from outside down into the foundation. But she disposed of it, so she had nothing but tragedy, really.
What was her maiden name before?
Lehman.
Lehman?
Donna Lehman.
Did she graduate from you here?
She was, no, she didn't graduate. She was short, just a few credits. And while just before her accident, she was picking up these credits so she could get her degree.
But most of her undergraduate work was done at the university here.
Uh-huh. Now, she had gone here to school, and she was working in the Wiseman Center. I'll show you a picture of her.
Talk to your husband about your son and what happened.
Oh, yes.
You had a conversation?
Oh, yes.
And what did he have of opinions?
When Terry was in Vietnam, Dave was in a very serious accident. He and I had been divorced for a couple of years, maybe more than that. And he was in a very serious accident. And Terry said I should have called the Red Cross and had him sent home. And I thought, I wasn't too sure he might not want to go back, and I didn't want to put up with that. He had a good record as far as it had gone so far,
Exactly.
And I just didn't want to tempt him to get back here and say, come and get me. Go to Canada, I'll do something. I didn't want to do that. And I figured that Dave wasn't going to die. And that he'd live, and I just couldn't see. If I thought Terry could have stayed home, it happened in March, and Terry actually came back the last part of May. Well, the fire base Marianne hadn't been overrun at that point. That happened while his father was in the hospital. And I went to the hospital and I told the nurses, I said, it's on the news. And they're showing, all the people coming in trying to take him out. I said, make sure he isn't listening to that news because he doesn't know it's that. And it was about 2 weeks before, well, we didn't know about what Terry, was caught at that. All the news said that all hands, had lost, and that 3 artillery pieces, and I don't know, 4 mortars had, moved out earlier. And, but I didn't know if it was his mortar or not. I would have no way of knowing. Until finally I heard from him. And then he came back. And, no, his, father frequently he comes here, to go to the doctor for his medical checkups. And we go out to dinner. And he stays here at the house. And, he used to come down to seminars and he'd stay here. So, we've had a good relationship. We just aren't married. That's the end of that. And he didn't remarry, and neither did I. And so he had to give up his law practice because he's had a couple of strokes. And they've, his speech is slurred. He still plays bridge. I don't know. It's because he's so hesitant when he's speaking. I just don't know how, if what's getting through to him and what isn't, I guess. So he didn't, he gave up his practice and left, Boscobel and, lives in Oshkosh where his parents are. They converted the Rolfe Hotel into, perhaps you're familiar with that hotel. Well, that's converted into, housing for handicapped or older people.
Older persons. My wife's family, mother and father live in Oshkosh. Also.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they live in the Marion Manor.
I haven't been up there for a long time.
Right.
Before I married David, I worked at the Boston Store, which was the big department store there. I worked there for a year, and I lived with Dave's family. So I don't know, not too familiar with it. They live on Western Avenue. It's, well, it's over near the fairgrounds or something.
Yeah,
like that.
it's on the south. It's on the South Milwaukee.
But
What was his impressions of what happened to Dave when he came back? Did he ever talk about what he thought may have been the cause for his son's demise?
I don't know.
Did he ever talk about it?
He didn't know. I think I knew Terry better than his dad did.
Yeah.
I don't think Terry, he didn't have as good a relationship with his father as he had with me. Because he was a little bitter over the divorce. Because I was here working and sending my money home to Dave, and in the meantime, he's having an affair with one of the local naughty girls. And that just shook Terry up because we had preached to him.
Exactly.
You know right from wrong, and you do not do anything that's going to, bring disgrace to your family. And so then he says, well, so what does my father do? I mean, he's the attorney here. It's a small town, a couple thousand, and everybody knew it except Terry and me. And when we were told about it, and then finally I just said, I just will stay here and work, and you can stay down there. Well, all she wanted him to do was get her a divorce, was what she wanted, and they never did marry. She married somebody else. So Terry was angry with his father, to tell you the truth. And he had a run. But anyway, they made up, But he was a little puzzled. But Terry just set high standards for himself, and that was scholastically, what he wanted to do, and couldn't do it because he was, as I said, he was young and he didn't know the wars there, and to concentrate. And again, he talked about the TAs like you did.
Yes.
And a lot of them were, of course, anti-war, which I suppose isn't bad, but when you argue with one of your students in class about when that student thinks, I gotta go, I'm ROTC, and I believe he was in Pershing Rifles too. Well, I mean, he'd have to go to class in uniform because we lived out here.
Yes.
He couldn't just easily change and get into uniform and get out of it and that Lord. And so he was quite conspicuous and took a
He
lot.
got rousted a great deal by the
Yeah.
students.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was so much demonstrations.
Oh, they
on the
didn't like
campus
it. They
at the
called him
time.
baby killer, you know. I don't think Cherry could ever hurt anybody. You can imagine that. And he was devastated by the poetry that he wrote. He was the kind of, I've never seen him, he didn't have any violent temper or any anger like that, so get into a fight or not. That wasn't his thing. He'd take his guitar and go up to his room, close the door. He'd leave him alone. He didn't want to have anybody ask him out. Sometimes, I know he had a girlfriend who's staying near the man. Oh, what's wrong, Terry? He just didn't want to, just go away. He wanted his own privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you did.
Okay.
Go through a book. He had a lot of, he had a very, very taste in his readings, And in school, as I said, in high school, he was a very good student.
Yeah.
And he had the lead in the junior play. They did The Mouse That Roared. And he never had any problem learning lines or anything. He knew his and plus everybody else's. And then he had lead in the senior play, You Can't Take It With You, and he played the part of the old grandfather Vanderhoff or something. He play acted from the time he was born. One day he'd be an Indian, the next day a cowboy, the next day a soldier, and a Union soldier. He had uniforms, that little caps and the whole outfit. That Indian days. When his grandparents went down to the Smoky Mountains, they brought him back a beautiful Indian headdress and an Indian suit made for him. He was always play acting, and I kind of think he dramatized what family had. His sensitivity is probably what did him. And Wayne being so close to him. Terry never had he knew people, but he'd have one of those, two close friends, in whatever town he lived. And they would appeal to him because, well, maybe they liked sketching, maybe they were art artists, or they played guitar, or they liked to hunt. Now, one of his close friends, and I just took them to dinner a couple of weeks ago, they went through high school together. And he and Ron were very close. And they both came to the university. And Ron, because of his religion, I think he was Seventh-day Adventist or something like that. And he never hunted, but he was an artist. He was a guitarist. But they maintained their friendship. And Terry goes off to war. He didn't object. It was fine with him. He understood why Ron couldn't go. And Ron, to this day, still works at Central Colony. He took that service,
What's his last name? Ron?
Ron Johnson. He lives in Sun Prairie. And I came home one night and there was a note on my door that had been by. I brought back bad memories to him, so I didn't see him. It was a year before he could come, and he brought me some things back. And we gave Ron two of Terry's guitars. He had a Spanish guitar that Ron admired, and but couldn't afford to buy it. I had given it to Terry before he went to Vietnam, and he had a Gibson that you could amplify, and we gave those two guitars to Ron. But then I hadn't seen Ron for about 8 years until I called him to tell him about Donna dying, and I said I'd like to see him. He said, well, let's make plans right now, since we're together. So they came and we went out to dinner and had a very nice dinner. He was married when Terry, and he had a little girl, which I haven't seen. Well, Ron was just devastated at Jerry's death. He, as you might know, a boy that can't go to war. This was no act. This was true. The man was raised that way. His family didn't believe in going to a movie. The women did not wear any makeup at all. The mother his Ron's sister.
What's his religion again?
Well, I think it's Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah.
It's not like a Baptist or Lutheran or Episcopalian.
I thought it was Amish.
Well, it could be. No, it's not that.
Right.
No, it's
Seventh-day Adventist.
Ron, when Terry was in Vietnam, I used to see Ron then. A lot of times Terry would want me to pick up tapes for him, music. And he'd say, well, ask Ron, I'll go and get them for you. So Ron would go and pick up the tapes that Terry wanted, we'd check them to him. So I used to see Ron quite a bit then. And one day, Ron stopped by here and he said, Mary, would you do me a favor? I said, well, if I can, I'd be happy to. He said, I'm trying to form a band. He was forming a band with the former music director at the high school in Boston. And he couldn't get no bank is going to loan money to a band. And he wouldn't go to his folks. Ron was not as close to his folks as you might think. He did not have close rapport with them. To this day he does. And so I co-signed a note for him. And, the band was it went for about 2 years or so like that. But then, it's hard to keep it together for the men to be able to practice, and then they were getting booked from so far out of town, and then try to hold a job and travel 100 miles maybe to a one-night stand. So they finally had to give it. But he and Terry were really good friends. But I know, and Ron said too, he said, I had to wait a while before I could come and see you again.
Let me turn the tape.
What do you mean, people that knew him as teachers?
Yeah.
Well, you see, he had been out of the high school for so long, and he had been living here with me, so I don't know what the reaction is. And of course, people that knew him here, friends of mine, they just can't believe it. They just couldn't understand it. It was a terrible waste. Just a terrible. You can't explain it. There's just no reason for it. I mean, that boy had just everything. I mean, we weren't poor people, and he just needed a little time to get it all together. I think if he could have found a decent job there, because he was willing to do anything. There was nothing, after having been in service, that he wasn't capable of doing it, but he was liked by his teachers. He had really good rapport with them.
What did he pursue in school?
Well, now, this is another point here. His father, he said he's got a good mind. He said he's got better thinking than I had at his age. He said, he wanted to be an attorney. That's why he left Republic Steel in Cleveland, was to go back and get a private practice, hopefully that Terry would take up law. Well, Terry was not the person that you could put in an office like that. He should be in the DNR department. He should be doing something like that, being outdoors.
Yes.
And that would have been right, and not be pressed. And I resented that. His dad said, you can do it, He was allowed to they write an entrance exam, and they had the integrated liberal study at the ILS school. Well, about 400 of the incoming freshmen here at the university were allowed to enroll in that after you've written and if you were accepted. Well, that's a fast-moving class. I mean, they do in a semester what the regular freshmen are doing in a full year.
Exactly.
Well, you have to have good study habits.
Exactly.
You can't be tearing off hunting partridge and pheasants and rabbits and
Right.
doing that. And that's what he would, and he didn't know himself that. And he didn't, he might have had a good mind, but I mean, it wasn't to sit in an office and be an attorney. He had good reasoning. But
He still needed that time alone to just assess things and
things had just moved too fast. Because as a kid in high school, a lot of fellows are dating in high school. And, you know, he didn't. I mean, he would be out hunting or catching bullfrogs or something like that. He didn't have time. He never had a date when he was in high school. Oh, so they had to see the Hawkins Day. And some little girl asked him to go to the party.
right.
And I remember he came and told me, he said, you know, he said, she doesn't have a lot of friends. He said, she's a real shy girl. He said, but she had nerve enough, you know, courage enough to ask him to go. I said, well, I think that's right. He said, she reminds me of my sister. He said, she's a lot like that. Well, there were some other girls that thought they should get him in their group. And so they, I don't know, they took Jerry, I guess, that she couldn't go. Anyway, they went. It was a big mix-up, but he took her to this. It was the only date he ever had. And it wasn't until they graduated that they had sort of an after-graduation party. They go and picnic and drink beer and play guitar and stuff like that. That he did that. And then he started dating one of the girls that was in school with him. But it was never anything serious thing. So he'd never done half the things that most young men had done, even when he was in college.
What about your daughter? How old was she in relation to Terry?
I had a marriage before her father's dead,
Okay.
and they're 11 years apart.
So she's older than
Yes, if she was born in 1938,
Okay.
and he was born in 49, and that's the age difference. And they got along real well. But you see, there's no competition there. She's a girl, 11 years older. She was his babysitter. You know, if I wanted to go to a movie at night, Pat could stay with her.
How did she relate to Terry on when he came back, or what did she think about him going to war and all of that?
Well, she knew that Terry just had to go because of the whole background. When the 32nd comes in review, we're up there on the reviewing stand with the general, sir, you know. And so it was just something that Terry had to do. But my daughter had a tragic life. Her husband was very fond of Terry. And he just couldn't believe it when they came here. 6 months later, he killed himself. So my daughter and I have seen it.
Similar tragedies?
Well, he got in the World War right about the Korean time, but he was stationed in Germany.
Okay.
And he served 2 enlistments. They gave him a leave home for 30 days if he'd re-up and come on back, and so he did that. And so he'd been in service. And he's been dead for, it was 9 years. And it'll be 9 years this January for Pat's husband, my daughter.
So it was after Terry.
Yeah, that's Terry and another thing, Pat's husband, Russ, had a drinking problem on weekends, and he had cirrhosis of the liver, and it was very painful.
Yes.
Just a little bit of food would hurt and pain him so much, and he'd go to work, but there was and he just went over to the hospital to get the cure. You know, several times. He came from a very nice family. I'll show you another one. So Pat still lives in her home.
Okay.